What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be doing a quick video to discuss how to address your player fatigue and some ways to manage your players' fatigue. Now, I just played a game in this Pittsburgh Steelers franchise on my channel that'll be going up shortly, and that game was against the Cleveland Browns in Week 8. Following that game, I saw major hits to my players' season fatigue. So a lot of them were starting to show yellow on their bars. They were starting to get a point where they were seeing a lot of fatigue. And so what I did in order to manage that fatigue, and what you guys can do in order to manage that fatigue, is make sure that after you see a major negative like that, you go and practice in half pads. And so what I did after that game is I went and made sure that I went in half pads, and you can see that a lot of the players, and one of the major players that I was actually worried about was Najee Harris. Najee Harris gained back 19 of his fatigue. If you see a green number like that shows minus 19, that's basically saying that they're taking away fatigue, which is a positive. So that can get a little bit confusing. If you don't see a red number, that's a good thing. If you see a green number, that means that they're recovering from where their fatigue is at. And so as it says, whenever you go through your training and everything, when you go half pads, you're going to get better fatigue recovery. Now, generally speaking, you want to try to be in full pads because you want to try to see the bonuses from being in full pads, but you also want to see the experience points from being in full pads. You guys can see here on the screen that I'm not getting a ton of experience points this week because I went half pads. However, it can be extremely beneficial to keep your players on the field. I know that a lot of people have been saying that they're having issues with the fatigue slider and their auto subs, and they think that that is the issue. In reality, what we've discovered the issue is if you allow your fatigue to get too far down, if you get into those yellows and even further down than that, your players are going to sub out and they're not going to come back into the game. That's basically how the fatigue is working this year. Now, whether that's operating properly or that is a bug and it's not operating exactly the way they want it to, that is the reality of the situation. So if you want to keep your players on the field, you're definitely going to have to do half pad practices and keep these players out of those yellow zones and try to keep as many of your players in the green as you can so that they are able to get onto the field and stay on the field for you. Now, here's my tip for you guys for managing this, however. Whenever you are trying to manage your fatigue, try to game plan your fatigue management games around your schedule. And so, for example, I was playing the Cleveland Browns, and I knew that I needed my bonuses to try to be as competitive in that game as possible. However, this week I'm going against the 2-6 Chicago Bears. If I was going against a more difficult team to compete against in the game, then I might have said, yeah, we should probably go full pads, try to get all our bonuses, and try to make things happen. However, if you are going to a point in your schedule where you're facing off against a team that's not as good, or a stretch of teams that aren't as good, like you can see I have the Bears here and then the Lions in back-to-back weeks, that can be extremely beneficial to your team to go half pads in those weeks and get yourself recovered to where you need to be so that when I face the Chargers and the Bengals or whoever I'm going to be competitive with, I can go with the full pads practices and make sure that I get the best bonuses possible. So just to break that down and just kind of simplify that to what I'm saying is you have to kind of pay attention to your schedule and make sure that you're kind of planning ahead for where your half pad games are going to be in the season. So far, I've gone through half the season, and through half the season, I've needed to have one half pad game. Now, as you get further into the season, you're going to start to see more and more fatigue, and so you're probably going to need to plan a couple more half pad games in the second half of your season, especially considering that it is a 17-game schedule and I've already had my bye week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look ahead to my schedule and pick out some games of, who is going to be best to practice half pads versus full pads against. Now, what I see as a major issue for my schedule here specifically is I have a stretch of games where it's Ravens, Vikings, Titans, Chiefs, Browns, Ravens, and that is going to be a pretty tough stretch of games. Now, I need to make sure that I go in and take a look at the records of all of those teams to see who is competitive or not, but essentially what I need to do is I need to pick out which games are going to be most important for me to rest players in. Well, a division game to finish out the season, there's a very good chance that this ends up being a game that is competing for the division at the end of the season. I can't sit my guys in that game. I probably can't sit my guys in the Browns game, which is a very similar one. The Chiefs are going to be difficult to sit my guys against, probably because of the fact that they're the best team in the AFC, if not one of the best teams in the AFC. And then the Titans and the Vikings. Okay, so what I say I should do is I should make sure that I am at full strength for the Titans, Chiefs, Browns, and Ravens to finish out the season. So I'm going to try to do half-pad games and try to make sure that I am not focusing on my starters and things like that in that Vikings week, especially since that's an away week. I'm looking at the schedule and I can see, okay, this is probably a week that I should try to get my guys rested and get them set up for the rest of the season. Now, in addition to that, I can probably pick another game. Like I said, I have that Bears game that I'm resting them this week. Then let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 more games is going to put me at around that Vikings schedule. So, try to essentially do a half-pad week, 4 games in between, which is going to work out nicely for us here. So, we have that half-pad week of the Bears, then we have 4 games in between, then we have the Vikings, which works out real nice for me. I can go a half-pad practice that week and then finish out the season strong with 4 more games after that. Now, you can change your full pads versus half pads type of practice as needed. Let's say you come up to some issues towards the end of the season, maybe you need to do that more often. You can absolutely do that, but it's prudent for you to plan ahead and look at your schedule and try to pick these games out so that you are staying ahead of it and you don't come to a game where it's the last game of the season playing for the division win and you can't get the best out of your guys because they are just tired and fatigued and can't stay in the game for you. Now, the last bit of this video that I want to talk about is how to actually go about managing this in a way that you can also prevent your players from getting too fatigued. And so you can do this while still going full pads in practice as long as you're switching between certain positions. So let's say, for example, Trey Turner, or better yet, let's say, for example, Kevin Dotson was getting really fatigued. You could even look at any of the other players on the team, Najee Harris, whatever. If they're getting really fatigued, but for whatever reason you want to recover that fatigue and you can't sacrifice a full pads practice, you need those bonuses for those players. Well, what you should do in order to get those players off of the practice field and get them some amount of fatigue recovery is take them out of the repetitions altogether. This is still a form of fatigue management because if you have him getting starter reps or split reps, they're still going to get fatigue from that. They're going to take a negative hit from that. If you take them off the field altogether, it's a rest day for them and they will get a positive boost from that. And so make sure that you have a backup behind that player and you can start that backup. So whereas normally, for example, with Najee Harris, I would be focusing all on, starter reps or split reps. If I know that he is an issue where he's getting into the yellow, he's getting fatigued, and I need him on the field, especially to be competitive for my games, I can leave everything else the same, leave it at full pads, and make sure that I focus train my backups so that he's not on the practice field. So there are a couple of different ways to manage your fatigue this year that can be really effective for you. You don't always have to switch it full pads, half pads in order to get that fatigue recovery. Now, that's the best way to get fatigue recovery. The best way to get fatigue recovery is go half pads and take those players off the practice field. So if you go half pads and take Najee Harris off the practice field, he's definitely going to get the most fatigue recovery possible. If you go half pads and leave him on the field, then he might not get as much fatigue recovery. If you go full pads and leave him on the field, or full pads and take him off the field, it's not going to be as effective. But there are different levels to this that can help you manage that fatigue, that season fatigue, and get your players staying in games for longer and make sure that you are competitive in the games that you need to be. So just to wrap up the video, let's talk about, and let's just finish talking about the fact that you should try as best as you can to plan out when your half pads and full pad practices are going to be. Much like in real life, they kind of plan these things out ahead of time. Now, yeah, they will reward these things based on, they had a really good game. Okay, we're gonna, not go full intensity and stuff like that. Or, we can tell that players are getting fatigued. Let's step it down a little bit, give guys a break off and stuff like that. Yeah, it does happen on the fly in real life, but they also plan these things out ahead of time. These teams have been around for forever. These coaching staffs have been around for forever. They know at what point in the season they need to give their guys a break and they need to step things down and allow their bodies to recover, because they are million-dollar players. They are assets, and they know that they need to give them time off. Likewise, you need to plan ahead and know that you need to give your guys time off from time to time in order to keep them healthy and keep them on the field, especially with the change to a 17-week season as opposed to the 16-game season that it used to be. That adds an extra game and adds a lot of fatigue to these players, and you're probably going to see that in real life. So with all that information being said, hopefully this is helpful to you guys in managing your overall season fatigue for your offense, defense, all that stuff, and helps keep your players on the field. If it was helpful to you and gives you some ideas of things that you're going to do in your franchises, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and comment down below with anything else you guys could use help on. I'll see you in the next one, and I hope you have a good one.